Well, welcome again to Friday Fundamentals. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. I'm James Michael Crusoe, and if you started from the beginning, you saw a gallery of ministers in the Church of Christ. This happened to be at the funeral of Dr. R.C. Wells several years ago in New York City. But I thought it was appropriate that I put that portrait up because I want to remind this audience of the old time gospel, what the pioneers preached and what they passed down to the next generation, and what this generation ought to be passing to the next generation, and the next generation ought to be passing the same thing down because we are to speak the same thing. This is the second presentation in a series on doctrine, division, differences, disagreement, and distinctives. And as I mentioned on last week, I presented this in a publication called Brotherhood Voices. I'm one of several ministers who have made contribution to that publication. If you're interested in reading the articles that is in that publication, you can go to my Facebook page and you can pull up the link on Brotherhood Voices. I want to pick up where I left off last week as we talk about doctrine, division, differences, disagreement, and distinctives. I opened up by sharing that Jesus made a hard statement, or before he made that hard statement, well, after he made the hard statement, he said, "My doctrine is not mine, but his that sent me." Jesus was on a mission of sharing the teachings of his Father, Jehovah God. And of course, we're not going to dispute the teachings of God or the teachings of Jesus Christ. In the sixth chapter of John, he made a hard statement, a hard saying that offended many people. And they went back and they walked with him no more. Yet we don't find Jesus tolerating or compromising because they went back. And so I ended last week's presentation with this statement: the current religious climate is guilty of changing the narrative in order to justify particular practices. This is demonstrated through redefinition of words that lead either to a misinterpretation or a misunderstanding. The verbal banner of differences becomes an attempt to mitigate what scripture calls sin. And 1 John 3 and 4 clearly states that sin is the transgression of the law. And the idea behind that is you've missed the mark by going beyond what is written. And one must be extremely careful to distinguish between disagreements on doctrine and differences related to doctrine. I want to be clear because this is too serious to trivialize. There's a difference between the holy and profane. There's a difference between the sacred and the secular. There is a difference between spiritual and carnal, righteous and unrighteous. The difference is as clear as day and night. Christians are either obedient or disobedient. Be careful to distinguish between disagreements on doctrine and differences related to doctrine. The word preference is also used to justify deviations from New Testament practices. One must be extremely careful to avoid misunderstanding or the misunderstanding of preferences regarding spiritual matters. For example, faith communities have the preference of utilizing several Bible translations. One congregation prefers the King James Version. Another congregation prefers the English Standard Version or the New American Standard 1995 version. In the early 80s, when I was in graduate school, the Revised Standard Version was commonly used in graduate study. In some areas, in some churches, in some congregations, lines were drawn based on which version was used by a particular congregation. Preference based on difference, for this example, can be tolerated. I want you to hear me well when we talk about preference, because I hear people saying, well, you prefer to use instruments in worship, or you prefer not to use instruments in worship. No, brothers and sisters, that's not a preference. I'm giving you an example of a preference where you may prefer a modern day translation, or you may prefer an older translation of scripture. That's preference. What we got to be very careful of, and what would constitute a matter of doctrine, is if any Christian preferred the Quran or the Book of Mormon over the Holy Bible. Now, that's doctrine. You start using the Quran or the Book of Mormon or Watchtower publications. Now, you can prefer that, but that would be a doctrinal error. Let me give you another example. A congregation may worship at 10:15 a.m. on Sunday, and another congregation may worship at 11 a.m. on Sunday, the same faith group, but they may begin their services at different times. If you visited one congregation, you will see them doing the exact same thing. They're going to sing, they're going to pray, they're going to give, they're going to commune. The word is going to be preached. You'll see the very same thing, but one congregation prefers to meet earlier in the morning. Another congregation prefers to meet later. Some congregations may prefer to have a second service in the evening. Another faith group believes that Saturday is the day of worship. That would be a disagreement on doctrine. A congregation may serve communion before the sermon or after the sermon. That's different. Is everybody with me? I'm trying to show you how we need to really look at doctrine, division, differences, disagreement, and distinctives. The frequency when it comes to communion would be a concern related to doctrine. The decision to utilize the accompaniment of instruments in Christian worship by churches of Christ would be a matter of doctrine. It has nothing to do with differences. The fact that Restoration Movement faith groups disagreed on the practice of instruments led to division. So when it comes to the doctrine regarding worship, the Bible is clear that instruments of music was absent in the New Testament church. Disagreement on doctrine must be resolved. The plea to speak the same thing should not be compromised or camouflaged. After all, it's the apostles' doctrine that really matters. The apostles' doctrine refers to the teaching and principles established by the apostles. They laid the foundation. Well, that's all I'm going to share with you on today when we talk about doctrine, division, differences, disagreement, and distinctives. Perhaps you have a question, perhaps you want more detail into this. We'd be more than happy to share some thoughts with you. So until next week, may the Lord bless you and may He bless you real good.